The airlock hissed open before I even finished tightening the last bolt on the coolant line, and 5 pairs of glowing eyes stared straight at me from the corridor. I dropped my wrench. "Dale," Vaitha said calmly from behind them, like this was the most normal thing in the galaxy. "These are my sisters." My hands were still greasy. My apartment behind me had exactly 1 bedroom, 1 couch, and a fridge that barely fit 2 people's food. And now there were 5 alien women standing in my doorway, with bags, cases, and what looked like a live plant that hissed at me. "You said yes," Vaitha reminded me gently, seeing the panic rising on my face. "On my world, that means more than just us." I had proposed 3 days earlier, down on my knee, ring in hand, heart pounding harder than it had during any hull breach I'd ever patched. She had said yes. I had been the happiest man on this station. Nobody warned me that saying yes came with extra passengers. "How much more?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "5 more," she said, smiling like it was a gift. The eldest sister stepped forward first. She was tall, straight-backed, dressed in a deep violet robe that looked far too formal for a maintenance deck apartment. Her eyes swept across my cramped living room like she was inspecting a crime scene. "This is where you intend to raise a household?" she asked, her tone sharp enough to cut metal. "It's where I live," I said carefully. "It's not much, but it's mine." "It will need to be enough for 6, she replied, and walked straight past me into the kitchen. I looked at Vaitha, silently begging for help. She just squeezed my arm and whispered, "Be patient. This is how we test the ones who matter." Test. That word landed in my stomach like a dropped tool. The second sister shoved past the first with far less ceremony. She was built like she could bend station bulkheads with her bare hands, muscles taut under a sleeveless tunic, a long weapon strapped across her back that I sincerely hoped was ceremonial. "You," she said, pointing a finger the size of a wrench at my chest. "You fixed the reactor coupling on Deck 4 last cycle. I read the report." "That was me," I admitted, unsure if this was a compliment or an accusation. "Good," she said. "Then you will not embarrass yourself when I challenge you." "Challenge me to what?" She grinned, all teeth. "You will find out." Before I could ask anything else, the third sister slipped in front of her, practically vibrating with energy. She had wide, curious eyes and carried a small device that beeped every time she looked at me. "Fascinating," she muttered, scanning my face, my hands, even my shoes. "Human skin oxidizes so quickly under stress. Your pulse just spiked 40%. Do you always sweat this much when meeting new people, or is this specific to meeting us?" "Definitely specific to meeting you," I said honestly. She beamed like I'd handed her a research grant. "Excellent. I have 400 more questions." I turned to Vaitha again, and this time, I didn't bother hiding the fear on my face. 400? She rounds down, Vaitha said. "It's usually closer to 600. Before I could process that horror, something small and fast slammed into my side and wrapped both arms around my waist. I looked down to find the youngest sister, barely reaching my chest, staring up at me with enormous eyes full of open adoration. "You're the one who's going to be my brother," she said, voice full of wonder. "Vaitha talks about you all the time. She says you make terrible jokes and burn the food, but she likes you anyway." "That's accurate," I admitted, patting her head awkwardly since I had no idea what the proper greeting was. She did not let go. In fact, she seemed to be attaching herself to my hip permanently, like a barnacle with opinions. The last sister didn't step forward at all. She stood at the very back of the group, cloaked in dark gray fabric that covered most of her face, saying absolutely nothing. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply watched me with eyes so still, I felt like I was being measured by something ancient and patient, like a mountain deciding whether or not to let me climb it. "That's Senny," Vaitha whispered. "She doesn't talk much, but when she does, everyone listens." "What is she thinking right now?" I whispered back. "I genuinely do not know," Vaitha admitted, "and that terrifies even me." Great. Fantastic. My future wife's silent sister was already judging my soul, and I hadn't even offered anyone a drink yet. "Well," I said, clapping my greasy hands together in a pathetic attempt at hospitality. "Welcome to my home." "I'm afraid it's a little small." "It is very small," the eldest sister agreed instantly, not even trying to be polite about it. "We'll manage," Vaitha said firmly, giving her sister a look that could have melted station hull plating. That night, I learned my first lesson about hosting 5 alien sisters in a one-bedroom apartment. Nobody sleeps according to a normal schedule. The scholar sister stayed up until 3 in the morning, asking me questions about human digestion, while I tried to fall asleep on the couch. The warrior sister did push-ups against my kitchen counter at 4 in the morning, grunting with each rep like she was fighting off invaders. The youngest crawled onto the couch beside me at some point during the night, and fell asleep holding my arm like a stuffed toy, and I didn't have the heart to move her. By morning, I hadn't slept more than 2 hours. My apartment smelled like unfamiliar spices from something the eldest sister had cooked without asking, and there was a scorch mark on my ceiling that nobody would explain. "This is fine," I muttered to myself, rubbing my eyes. "This is completely fine." It was not fine, but I had said yes, and I intended to keep my word, even if that word came wrapped in 5 extra people and a plant that hissed whenever I walked past it. The first real test came 2 days later, and I didn't even realize it was a test until I was standing in the middle of it. The warrior sister, whose name I'd finally learned was Cora, cornered me near the station's training deck with that same predatory grin from our first meeting. "Spar with me," she said. It wasn't a question. "I fix reactors," I said. "I don't fight people who could bend me in half." "Then I will go easy," she said, which did not sound reassuring in the slightest. I tried to explain that humans generally avoided hand-to-hand combat with people 3 times our strength, but Cora wasn't interested in excuses. She squared up, fists raised, waiting. I thought about running. I genuinely considered it, but Vaitha was watching from the sidelines with an expression that told me this mattered more than my pride, so instead of fighting, I did the only thing that made sense to me. I sat down on the training mat. Cora blinked. "What are you doing?" "Refusing to fight you," I said. "Not because I'm afraid, though I absolutely am, but because beating each other up isn't going to prove anything except that you're stronger than me, which everyone already knows." She stared at me for a long moment, fists still raised, clearly unsure what to do with an opponent who simply wouldn't stand up. "Then what would prove something?" she finally asked, lowering her hands slightly. "Teach me something instead," I said. "I'll probably fail terribly at it, but at least we'll both learn something new about each other." Something shifted in her expression. The predatory grin softened into something closer to genuine interest. "You are a strange human," she said. "I've been told." She spent the next hour teaching me basic footwork instead of trying to knock me flat, and by the end of it, I was covered in bruises anyway, but she was laughing. Actual laughter, loud and warm, echoing off the training deck walls. Vaitha found me afterward, icing my shoulder in the kitchen while the scholar sister hovered nearby, taking notes on bruise discoloration patterns. "You passed," Vaitha said quietly. "Passed what?" "Cora doesn't respect strength," she said. "She respects people who know their own limits and don't pretend otherwise. You could have refused entirely. Instead, you found another way to stand your ground." I hadn't realized I was being tested at all. I had just been trying not to get punched. The scholar sister's test came next, though it stretched out over days rather than a single moment. Her name was Ilya, and she followed me everywhere with that beeping device, cataloging everything from how I made coffee to how I hummed off-key while fixing broken equipment. "Why do you make noise while you work?" she asked one afternoon, watching me replace a filtration unit under the kitchen sink. "Helps me think," I said. "Keeps my hands moving, even when my brain gets stuck." "Inefficient," she noted, tapping something into her device. "Probably," I agreed, "but it works for me." She asked question after question, day after day, about everything from human sleep cycles to why I preferred tea over the bitter Yalthan drink she'd introduced me to. At first, I thought she simply saw me as some kind of specimen to study, a curiosity from an unfamiliar species. But slowly, I started noticing something different in the way she looked at me. One evening, exhausted after a double shift repairing a hull breach on Deck 7, I collapsed onto the couch, without even bothering to eat. Ilya appeared moments later holding a plate of food she had clearly prepared herself, something that smelled suspiciously like an attempt at human cooking. "You forgot to eat again," she said, setting it down in front of me. "Your blood sugar patterns suggest irritability follows within the hour if you don't." "You made this?" I asked, surprised. "I researched human nutritional requirements extensively," she said, almost defensively. It seemed logical to apply the research practically. I took a bite. It was strange, slightly too salty, definitely unlike anything I'd eaten before, but it was food, and it was made with more care than the word's logical application suggested. "Thank you," I said. She didn't respond right away, just watched me eat with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, something almost shy. "You are the first subject who has ever thanked me for observation," she finally said quietly. "You're not observing me anymore, Ilya," I said. "You're taking care of me. Those are different things." She blinked rapidly, and for the first time since arriving, she put her device down without recording a single word. The youngest sister, whose name turned out to be Poppy, didn't need any elaborate test at all. Her test was simpler and somehow more exhausting than all the others combined. She just wanted to know I would stay. She asked me constantly, in 100 different ways, whether I was really going to be family forever, whether I would get tired of having so many new sisters, whether I would send them all away once the wedding was over. "I'm not going anywhere," I told her one night, when she crawled onto the couch again looking for reassurance instead of sleep. "Families don't work like that. You don't get returned once you're part of one." "Humans do that sometimes," she said quietly. "I've read stories." "Some humans do a lot of things," I said, "but I'm not most humans, and Vaitha isn't most humans' wife either. When I said yes, I meant all of it, including you." She didn't say anything back, just leaned her head against my shoulder, and finally, blessedly, fell asleep. The eldest sister, whose name I eventually learned was Marlowe, remained the hardest to win over. She corrected my table manners, questioned my career choices, and once spent an entire dinner listing reasons why an engineer's salary might not be sufficient to support a household of 6. I could have argued back. I could have gotten defensive, pointed out that nobody asked her opinion on my finances. Instead, I did something different. I asked her to teach me. "Teach you what?" she asked, startled by the question. "Whatever it is that makes you worry so much," I said. "You clearly care about your sisters more than anyone I've ever met. I'd rather learn what you value than argue against it." For the first time since arriving, Marlowe looked genuinely caught off guard. She studied me for a long moment before answering. "On our world, the eldest sister carries responsibility for the entire household's future," she said slowly. "If a marriage fails, if a household falls apart, it reflects on my judgment as much as anyone else's. I am not testing you because I dislike you, Dale. I am testing you because if I fail to protect my sisters, that failure belongs to me." Something in her voice cracked slightly, just enough to reveal the exhaustion underneath all that formality. "Then let me help carry it," I said. "Not instead of you, with you." She didn't answer immediately, but she stopped correcting my table manners after that night, and started teaching me instead, patiently explaining customs I hadn't understood, showing me traditions Vaitha had never thought to mention. Only Seni, the silent sister, remained a mystery. Days passed, then a full week, and she never spoke a single word to me directly. She watched everything, every interaction, every small kindness, and every small failure, cataloging it all behind eyes that gave nothing away. I started to wonder if I would ever pass whatever test she was silently running. The real crisis came without warning, the way real crises always do. An alarm tore through the apartment in the middle of the night, sharp and urgent, the kind of alarm that meant something on the station had gone seriously wrong. I was out of bed and pulling on my uniform before I'd even fully woken up, years of training taking over faster than conscious thought. "Hull breach," I said, reading the emergency display on my wrist unit. "Deck 3, right below the water reclamation system." "That's near the children's quarters," Marlowe said, suddenly wide awake, all traces of formality gone from her voice. Cora was already moving, pulling on boots, strapping on the weapon she carried out of habit rather than necessity. "Then we move." I didn't have time to argue about who should or shouldn't come. There wasn't time for anything except action. I grabbed my emergency repair kit and ran, and to my surprise, all 5 sisters ran with me without hesitation. The corridor outside Deck 3 was chaos. Alarms blaring, red emergency lights flashing against smoke-filled air, station crew shouting instructions that were being drowned out by the noise. A support strut had failed near the water reclamation core, and pressurized coolant was spraying into a corridor packed with terrified families trying to evacuate. My training kicked in instantly. "I need eyes on the secondary shutoff valve," I shouted, pulling up the station schematics on my wrist display. "It's behind that panel, but the corridor's flooding with coolant vapor. Whoever goes in needs protection from the fumes." "I can go," Ilya said immediately, already scanning the corridor with her device. "I have analyzed coolant toxicity levels extensively. I know exactly how long exposure can be tolerated safely." "I'll clear a path," Cora said, already moving toward the panicking crowd, using her size and strength to calmly guide frightened families toward the evacuation route instead of letting them stampede. "I'll keep the children calm," Poppy said, and without waiting for permission, she ran straight into the crowd, crouching down to the frightened kids' eye level, telling them some kind of story in a bright, steady voice that cut through the panic like a light in the dark. Marlowe moved to the emergency coordination point, taking charge of directing crew members with the same commanding presence she'd used to intimidate me on our first meeting, except now that presence was exactly what the chaos needed. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before diving toward the failed strut, coolant vapor stinging my eyes, my hands moving on pure instinct as I worked to reroute the shutoff sequence before the whole system failed completely. That was when Seni appeared beside me. She didn't say a word. She simply knelt down, took one look at the tangled wiring beneath the broken panel, and began working alongside me with hands that moved faster and more precisely than I had ever seen. She anticipated exactly what I needed before I asked for it, handing me tools in perfect sequence, holding wiring steady while I made connections that would have taken twice as long alone. Together, without a single spoken word between us, we sealed the breach. The alarms cut off, the coolant spray stopped. The corridor lights shifted from panicked red back to steady white. I sat back against the wall, breathing hard, coolant residue coating my hands, my heart still hammering from adrenaline. Around me, the corridor slowly settled into relieved silence, crew members checking on frightened families, the immediate danger finally passed. Seni sat down beside me, still saying nothing, watching the aftermath with those same unreadable eyes. "Thank you," I finally managed, my voice hoarse, "for helping." She turned to look at me, and for the first time since arriving at my apartment door a week and a half earlier, she spoke. "You did not hesitate," she said quietly, her voice softer than I expected. "Not when the strut failed. Not when the coolant sprayed toward the children's corridor. You simply moved toward the danger, the way someone moves toward family." "Someone had to," I said. "That's just what you do." "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "That is not what everyone does. I have watched many people meet danger. Most hesitate, even briefly, weighing their own safety first. You did not weigh anything, you simply acted." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us the way it always had. "I did not speak to you before now, because words are easy," Seni finally continued. "Anyone can promise loyalty with words. I needed to see what you would do when words were not enough. Tonight, you showed me." Veta appeared then, pushing through the thinning crowd, relief flooding her face as she spotted me sitting safely against the wall. She dropped down beside me instantly, checking me over for injuries with hands that trembled slightly from fear, only now catching up to her. "You're safe," she whispered, pressing her forehead against mine. "We're all safe," I said, glancing around at her sisters scattered throughout the corridor, still helping frightened families, still calming crying children, still doing exactly what needed to be done without anyone having to ask. Marlowe approached first, her formal composure finally cracking into something warmer as she looked at me with what could only be described as genuine respect. "You held this household together tonight," she said. "Not through strength alone, and not through words alone. Through action. at the exact moment it mattered most. We held it together, I corrected. All of us. Together. Cora clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, nearly knocking me sideways, grinning that same predatory grin, except now it was full of warmth instead of challenge. Perhaps humans are not so soft after all. Ilya crouched beside me, already scanning my exposure levels to the coolant vapor, but her earlier clinical detachment had shifted into something closer to genuine concern. "Your readings are within safe limits," she said. "I am relieved." Poppy threw both arms around my neck without warning, nearly toppling me over completely. "You didn't leave," she said into my shoulder. "Even when it was scary, you didn't leave." "I told you," I said, hugging her back. "I'm not going anywhere." Senny remained quietly beside me through it all, saying nothing further, but for the first time, there was the faintest hint of something like a smile at the corner of her mouth. Later that night, once the corridor had been fully repaired and the crisis fully resolved, we all sat together in my too-small apartment, exhausted, bruised, coolant-stained, and somehow more comfortable together than we had ever been before. "I think," Vetha said, leaning against my shoulder, "my sisters finally understand why I said yes." "It wasn't about tests," Marlowe admitted quietly, glancing around at the group. "Not really. It was about whether this human could hold an entire household together when everything fell apart at once. Tonight, he proved that beyond any doubt." "Humans are strange," Cora said, stretching out across my couch like she owned it. "Reckless, stubborn, impossibly soft in some ways, and impossibly strong in others." "Fascinating combination biologically speaking," Ilya added, already tapping notes into her device again, though this time, she was smiling while she did it. Poppy, curled up against my side as usual, simply yawned and murmured, "I like having a brother who doesn't run away." Senny said nothing, but she settled onto the floor near my feet, close enough to be part of the group for the first time since arriving, and that silence somehow felt louder than any words she could have spoken. I looked around my cramped, chaotic, impossibly crowded apartment, filled wall to wall with people who had been strangers only days earlier, and were now, somehow, unmistakably family. My future wife rested against my shoulder. Her 5 sisters filled every remaining inch of space around us, each one carrying their own strength, their own strange gifts, their own place in this suddenly enormous life I hadn't fully understood I was signing up for. Back on Earth, people always said humans were too impulsive, too stubborn, too quick to leap before thinking things through completely. Out here among the stars, surrounded by species who valued caution and hierarchy and careful calculation above almost everything else, that same impulsiveness apparently meant something different entirely. It meant running toward danger instead of away from it. It meant saying yes to 5 extra people without a second thought, simply because the person you loved needed you to. It meant building a family out of chaos, one impossible night at a time, and somehow making it feel exactly like home. I had said yes to one woman 3 days earlier, expecting a simple wedding and a quiet life together. Instead, I had gained 5 sisters, one impossibly small apartment, and a family louder and stranger, and more wonderful than anything I could have imagined. And as I sat there in the middle of all that beautiful chaos, coolant still drying on my hands, I realized something that no amount of alien caution or careful calculation could have taught me. Some things really were worth saying yes to, no matter how many extra people came along with the answer.